using the standard procurement method can actually hurt that RFP. Let me explain that. The common myth is that the RFP creates the routing guide, and the routing guide is the budget, right? It tells me every lane, every load, here's my total spend that I expect. In reality, the routing guide is at best a lower bound, right? Because it ignores any kind of failure of the routing guide, new lanes, or going to spot. And so the problem is RFP is what in procurement is called a coverage policy. Each lane has a contracted rate to reduce the risk of exposure to the spot market. Again, it's Linus's blanket. I have a rate for every lane and I keep them in my back pocket just in case I need them. The ugly truth is they usually don't get honored anyway for those one-off and small lanes, but we'll talk more about that in a second. But it can also actually hurt. And let me explain this from some work that we've done up here at MIT. And what I have here is two charts. The top one is for every row in the top chart is a lane and how much volume comes in loads per year, like over 100, 53 to 100. So you figure more than weekly. 13 to 52 means monthly to weekly, down to one load per year. And then I have in the top chart, the percentage of lanes that appear in 1 year that also showed up the next year. So for example, in 2016, 89% of the loads that had 7 to 12 loads showed up in 2017. And if you look at this, you can see as I go down the line, as I have lower volume on the lane, the probability it shows up the next year goes way down. To the ones, it's less than half. Okay. And then on the bottom chart, what I'm showing is what percent of lanes correspond to that. So for example, in 2018, lanes with 2 to 6 annual loads, so one every other month at most, constituted 28% of all the lanes in the network. So it's a big chunk, a quarter of the lanes, and only half of them showed up the next year. So what this means is these lanes constantly move. So if I use last year's history that I'm going to bid out, I'm bidding out a bunch of lanes that won't materialize. And there are other one-off lanes that are going to materialize that weren't in my bid. So there's a lot of churn here that's, why am I putting contracts on some of these lower volume lanes?
So can I just,
second point?
This is just one thing, Chris, that I want everyone to understand. Think about this for a moment. If you're buying aluminum, if you're buying, plastics or cartons or whatever, think about the commodity that you're purchasing. Go to your supplier and say, well, last year I did this. This year I might do this. Give us your best price. You're going to have a completely different dialogue because your suppliers are going to be looking for some base load guarantee that X says I can count on this as I go in and do my production and manufacturing plan. And basically the takeaway, and this is what we were talking about on the trade show floor with people, what you're basically asking carriers to do is bid on a theoretical construct as opposed to this is what's going to actually happen. Is that a fairly accurate assessment?
Yes, I like to call them aspirational. We hope that this is the volume that's going to be, and the carriers hope that the volume will materialize, and they price accordingly. Yeah, but what we found is what's interesting is doing this has risks for the next year, and so this is based off a paper that Angie Accacello, PhD, just graduated. She's doing a postdoc now. Did a great job analyzing this. So essentially, if you look at this, I have a 2x2 here, and you have that first stage versus second stage procurement. And so what I'm showing here, was the lane awarded to a carrier in the strategic bid in the RFP, yes or no? And then did at least one load happen over the course of the year on that lane? That's the second stage. And you see this blue box means yes, it was in the bid, and yes, volume came. And only at least one load. We didn't look at what was promised, just one. And that's that blue square. But then, and the bottom orange is you didn't award it in the strategic bid, but it materialized, so volume went on it, right? And then in this top right, the ghost lane box, that's where you had it in the bid, you awarded to a carrier, no volume showed up, right? So you understand the three boxes. And of course, if it wasn't awarded and it never showed up, that's irrelevant. It never showed up. So let me show you what this looks like. 60%, 70%, and this is data using C.H. Robinson's TMC data, the great partner of ours doing research up here at MIT. These are all ghost lanes. The vast majority of lanes and bids are ghost lanes. They're up here in this right box. Now, you look at this now, it's not all the volume. This is a percent of lanes, because most of the lanes that get ghosted are the very small ones, onesie twosies. And so it doesn't represent a lot of historical volume, but it's eating up all the time, because if you look at the amount of time it takes for me to do a bid, it's a function of the number of lanes I have, not the number of loads on a lane. It's the number of things I'm assigning. So this kind of clogs the work. But Angie found something even more depressing, that every 10% increase in ghost lanes awarded to a carrier leads to higher rates, 1 to 2%, that next year from the same carrier. So it's a reputational risk. So by ghosting these, by a shipper ghosting a lane, you feel it the next year. And this is implicit increases that we've seen over years. So it's pretty interesting to see what the ramification. It makes sense, right? If I ghost you enough, then I'm going to increase my rates because I don't know if stuff's going to happen.